afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Chester Historical Society to a program I know you're going to enjoy. My wife and I, are pleased, if you haven't, hopefully you rush back and get any food or beverage that you want before we start, and we'll probably be still thereafter. And I'd like to thank Paulette, Sandy, and Marie Ann, and all the rest of the people who brought food this afternoon. We've got a great program for you. In fact, my wife and I had a rush back from Bermuda to get back here. Wow. But I was just going to mention, we were on a cruise, and we've gone on several cruises, and one of the things that happens when you're on a cruise, you meet all sorts of people from all different parts of the country. One of the things I always bring with me on one of these cruises is I've got an old Whalers logo t-shirt. You can't believe how many people stop and tell you, especially Canadians, oh, the Hartford Whalers. It's a great conversation starter because I said, well, we know the people that designed that. And so we get into a whole conversation, and you talk about anything from Special Olympics posters, everything else that they've done, U.S. postage stamps, love stamp, Christmas stamp. Yeah, that's the goods. That's who designed these. So they're an international treasure. But I think the reason why many of us came today, and I know one of the reasons why we wanted to do something with this, was that they're a local treasure. The goods do something irreplaceable in town. They design posters, they've helped out innumerable groups who have no money or very little money, and they've promoted so many things and the Chester Historical Society has been one of the main beneficiaries. So I'd like to introduce our local treasures, Jan Cummings Good and Peter Good.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you all for coming. I mean, seeing so many familiar faces is so gratifying for us. I want to thank the Historical Society for inviting us to do this presentation, and I especially want to thank Jean-Claude Haynes, who is introducing the rear projection screen for the first time in the meeting house. He's been an incredible help technically. I have a question, and he's right there to solve it. The 50th anniversary of the Historical Society coincides precisely with our life in Chester. We've been here 50 years. And in preparing for this presentation, we went into our archives and uncovered specimens that we hadn't seen in a long time, as well as the archives of the Chester Historical Society. And going through that process, it brought up so many memories of so many wonderful people that we worked with. A lot of them have passed on, but people that were an inspiration to us and catalysts for initiating a lot of the projects that we worked on. The work you see today will be primarily Chester, the work we did for Chester. Our core design business was a little bit different. It's what sustained us, and that was doing work for corporations, institutions, businesses all over Connecticut and the United States, and a few outside the country. That was our material sustenance. Our spiritual sustenance is the work we did here in Chester. And we felt great about it. Like so many other people that have volunteered their time, served on boards, commissions, helped with special events, after doing their day job, that was the way we treated the work for Chester. It was squeezed in between lots of other assignments, but it was always as important to us. And I think the reason is that you like to be proud of your home, respect it, nurture it, and Chester's our home. And we were not alone. So many other people, many of them already feel the same way about this town. And so we're happy to have, we feel privileged to have been able to do this work.
Actually, Peter and I first became enthralled with Chester in 1964 when we visited his sister Eleanor and her family at their Cedar Lake cottage. Eleanor and Allison are sitting right here in the front row. We're so happy to have both of them here. Allison, you experienced Chester too, didn't you? Yeah, as a baby. Yeah. Yeah. Well, 5 years later, after that first encounter, serendipity brought us back. And Chester provides has been my mantra ever since. So it was the look and feel of this timeless town that initially attracted us. Locals won our hearts when we were enticed to participate in a cohesive community committed to advancing the common good. The rest is our history here. Of course, as Peter said, we all know Chester's history vibrates with the vitality of countless individuals responsible for its remarkable evolution. Many have passed on, as Peter did say. Many more are still vital and are still here and still working and helping so much with all of the different initiatives in this town. And we together are gratified to see so many of you here today. Please know that whether we manage to include you in our recollections, we're forever grateful for your presence in our lives.
One of the very first projects I did for the Historic Society was this calendar poster on the left. This was in honor of two wonderful, talented women photographers in Chester. And the calendar runs along the bottom.
I thought it was quite interesting in those days, this is 1972, that this historical society chose to honor two professional women. And what does that say about this town, the welcoming of this town and the pride that this town has of strong, capable women? The two women were Ella Spencer Pratt Finch, who was the first woman photographer in town, and she was born in the 19th century, middle 19th century. And then Lydia Fargo was the first professional woman photographer. And the fact that they were honored and talked about and made known again in 1972, I thought had a lot to do with the sensibilities of this town.
The poster on the right, craft work, was done to announce a crafts fair that was held actually on the grounds of the meeting house outside. It was around the same time. And the technology was so different. And this poster is actually silk screened in our backyard. And this one was silk screened on corrugated cardboard, and silk screened on fabric and whatnot. We had a lot of experience in silk screening when we were at school together before we were married. And that craft work was actually used over a decade, I believe. And this shows the eclectic nature of our design styles. Obviously, the one on the left is more traditional. The one on the right is more of an international style, more modernist, using symbology. using sans serif type and so forth. So as designers, we never could adopt a single style to solve all the problems, and we still believe that.
I have to say, it's been a fascinating process for the two of us to try to remember certain things about how did we do that, when did we do that. And when we talked, we kind of practiced a little bit about what we're going to say about these things. And I kept saying, yeah, we silk screened those posters and aprons and everything in our barn. Just this afternoon, we were talking to Carrie Hall, who was our neighbor at the time, and she said, Jen and Peter, I remember you guys silk screening on your picnic table in the side yard. So, you're right. But, you know, at the end of our little presentation, if anyone has any corrections or we'd love to hear you.
Another project we did for the Historical Society, speaker, we actually did 2 calendars in this style, one 1974 and 1975. And we were inspired by a scrapbook that had a lot of entries from the New Era Press from 100 years ago. And we were amused by the language and the actual stories that were printed in this shoreline, just like a shoreline newspaper covering the lower Connecticut River Valley. And we used old engravings to illustrate those blurbs. And I want to just read one blurb so you could get the flavor and the humor of the language. In the March issue, readers were told of the great success of Captain Pratt's ice boat, being extensively patronized by both ladies and gentlemen, its trips extending from Brockways to Middle Haddam. On one occasion, the trip from Hadlime to Brockways, a distance of almost 5 miles, was made in 9 minutes. On the return trip, what might have been a serious misfortune occurred not to the boat, but to one of the passengers, a gentleman having a very valuable silk hat knocked overboard. All the blurbs had that kind of funny language, and they were illustrated by using old engravings that we had been collecting, woodcuts, engravings, line cuts from magazines, from company handbooks and catalogs and so forth. And we manipulated those by adding others and doing a cut and paste to express the actual blurb.
I have to say, too, going through this process, can you still hear me? It's slipped. We've learned even more about each other after being together for over 55 years. We're still learning about each other, the way we think, the way we work, and to still find new things about each other has been quite a wonderful experience. And I'll point out a few other things as we go along, but the fact that Peter used these old engravings, but then he found a little silk hat, a little black hat, flying off the... I just got such a kick out of seeing that again. Anyway.
Some of the books, and some of the actual books are here that we did. I was invited to be on the publications committee of the Historical Society by Barbara Delaney, Gwen Orton-Jones, and Betty Killam. And it was very strategic of them because I was the only designer in town at that time. Now there's plenty of designers, very talented designers in town, and everyone knows a designer or has a nephew that's a designer or is a designer themselves. But at that time, it was a very primitive time. People didn't know what a graphic designer was. Anyway, the first book we did was a Chester House book. It's the one on the upper left. And I utilized...
That was in 1976.
I utilized a Barber woodcut. Barber was a fellow who went all over Connecticut doing woodcuts of towns. And that was available to us. I matched a period type to that. And it was a very simple, very, very simple layout. And then in 1984, or 84, we did a second version, because in order to qualify to be in the book, your house had to be over 100 years old. And within that time, many others came onto the roll.
Although our house never did qualify.
You just missed the second one.
Yeah.
And then other books, the Chester scrapbook was filled with all kinds of historical information, brief history of Chester, a lot of wonderful photographs. Search Under the Eaves was put together by Gwen Orton Jones, and it was about what people collected in their attics and so forth.
I'd like to just intercede there. I noticed when we were doing the research that the Search Under the Eaves is not listed on the fabulous Historical Society website. It's a fabulous resource if anyone wants to play around in there. But Search Under the Eaves is not listed. I wonder if it's out of print. And it's really...
It's sold out.
I'm sorry?
That's because it's sold out.
Sold out. And what was, for me, so interesting to look back on that is how do you research history and what do you use to remember history? And as Peter mentioned, Gwen Orton Jones was involved and her husband Harry were very involved, taking photographs and writing and researching. And this book was for the 350th anniversary of Saybrook Colony. And the dedication in the front of that book is to those who unwittingly, through their inventories, made their Chester known to us. I think it's interesting to read through it and see what people owned and took the time to inventory that history.
The other one, at a society meeting, was the Fourth Ecclesiastical Society of Old Saybrook. Chester was part of Old Saybrook Colony at that time. And it's extraordinary entries about building this building and so many other things. And I just want to quote one pull-out quote in the book by Thomas Silliman. And it was August 26, 1776.
Was he a pastor there, I think?
Pardon?
I think he was a pastor.
A deacon. This is a remarkable year in which I doubt not will be recorded in history to the end of time on account of the colonies revolting from England and declaring their independence, which they did on the 4th of July, and now the whole strength of our country is racked in opposing our enemies and is uncertain whether or not we are able to resist them. What about the Revolutionary War? So there's a lot of history that happened here before our recent history. I was asked to do the Chester Seal by then-Selectman Bob Blair.
And we cannot remember the exact date, so if anyone here does remember that date.
It was in
We
the
have a
70s.
newspaper article, but we don't have the date.
Well, it was around the time of the previous slide. It was in the early 70s, or mid-70s, I would say. The way things were done then is just so different from the way they were done now. I'm sure now there would be a committee. Everyone would have an opinion, and the squares would have been rejected out of hand. No! Someone would want some Latin phrase, whatever. But at that time, I just did it, and Bob Blair said, yeah, that's fine. There, you'll notice there's two different dates on the two seals there. One was 1740 and 1695. Well, after we did it, and it was adopted, and it was printed, stationery, and so many different things, Edmund Delaney formed a one-man protest. Having been a historian and did all the research, he says, absolutely not. We were from 1692. So we had to redo everything, and we were happy to do that. I used a cedar sprig just because of the greenery and the beauty of that form. As a centerpiece, I try to avoid any cliches, hence the squirrels. The only state seal that has a squirrel in it, and just because there's a lot of squirrels around here. And they're cute. found out after that, and I think Peters and Artie mentioned this.
Yeah, let me just
Yeah.
preface this. Fairly recently, with a lot of new people who've come into town, and they bring their own exuberance and their own ideas, and they're saying, why the squirrel? Why do we see the squirrle in everything? What kind
They
of
even dared to
mascot
call it
is
a
that
rodent.
in town? And we recall, I believe it was in another newspaper article, that the old timers, including Peters and Nardi, relayed that during the Depression, the squirrels kept many people alive. There were a lot of hunters in town, and the squirrels were quite tasty and quite helpful.
There were recipes for squirrels too.
And we have shown, again, we had no idea at the time how that squirrel would end up being a mascot, and you can see the different ways it's being used. Peter did a more modern version at one point, which is used on some of the materials and so forth. And then most recently, when we were asked to do the signage, Peter had the idea of putting that squirrel right on the top, greeting people as they come into town.
It's the best way to develop a mascot. I mean, if we ever said back then, let's take a vote on the squirrel as a mascot, I'm sure it would have been defeated. You know, but as it evolved and people would accept it, then all of a sudden it exists. We did over 35 road race T-shirts, and including the first one, which is not here. And I started incorporating the squirrel in the designs of the T-shirts in many different ways, as you can see. And there was one where I didn't use it, and I was chastised for that. How dare you not use the squirrel?
And we were happy to find this early photograph. I believe it's the second road race, which would have been 1980. And that's Justin, our son, right in the middle with his friend Sean Shank and some other friends. And we are thrilled to know that our own grandchildren now, Olive
Olive and Mateo ran
and
the last 2
Mateo
years.
Martinez Good has been running in the race the last couple of years.
Just a mark for the Chester Land Trust. Again, one of the requests from Barbara Delaney, and we were happy to do it.
That was 1999, and it's interesting to see how the seal itself could be adapted for the signage. So you have Chester Land Trust, but then the signage identifies the preserve, like Chester Creek Preserve, and there are several others throughout the town.
We did a lot of kind of ad hoc posters for very specific and unusual events. The Portable Folk Festival. Do you want to talk about
Yeah,
that?
that was a poster that PEP, which is more commonly known as PTA, had this festival, and we did a poster for it. And that portable folk group, I believe, played at the very first road race in 1979, and they continued to play at least until the last couple years, maybe even, I can't remember if they played this past year, but we watched them age as we did over the years, that they still enjoyed coming to Chester and playing for the road race.
Anyone for Tennis was an ill-fated initiative to do a fundraiser to construct tennis courts in Chester. And there was one event. There was one event with music. That's hence the graphic combining the banjo fingerboard with the tennis, right? That was the last effort because it was not readily acceptable. The first annual Doggone Storytelling Festival.
That was initiated by Catherine Conant, who was a professional storyteller, had this idea of doing a series, and it did become a series. But the first idea was to call it Dogtown Storytelling Festival. And some of the people who had been here in the early days were quite offended because in those early days, maybe Patty Vassie Garcia remembers, I don't know, Chester was kind of looked down upon because of the roaming dogs.
Is a
So we
pejorative
did
term.
change it to Doggone Storytelling Festival. And now we look back and think, oh my gosh, dogs rule here. They are so welcoming. You go to the Sunday market, you see the dogs all around, petted and admired. And then we have the Strut Your Mutt store, which
The only
barely.
town in the lower Connecticut
Yeah.
River Valley that has a specialized canine store.
So times certainly have changed.
Just some other posters, the original ones are here. Band concert on the grounds of this building, house tour, shrub.
That was sponsored by the United Church of Chester, and that's, I think that's still going on. It's not every year, but every 2 or 3 years, it's become a really popular event.
The Echo Arts Festival, I used an illustration that came from our calendar. One of our calendars originally, and adapted it a little bit for this. A lot of times we use art over and over again, if it's our art. We have the rights to it, of course.
That was sponsored by the Land Trust and the Conservation Commission, and the shrub sale was the Chester Rotary.
One of the more challenging design problems that we had was when we acquired the old stone bank building. And you could see immediately some of the problems that we had. If you look at the center photograph, the stairway was really out of code, dangerous, and had to be replaced.
This is actually one of my many
Oh, yeah.
Chester Provides stories, because we had been renting a spot out by Exit 6, what's now known as, no, it's not even known, it was the old Pequot building. Anyway, we had been looking for almost a year. Our accountant said, we ought to buy a building, and that seemed like kind of a big jump for us. But we've been looking, and on my 40th birthday, it was a Sunday, 1984, and we walked downtown for breakfast, and our local realtor, Billy Bonfanti, was taking a photograph of the building. And we said, oh my God, Billy, what are you doing? Tell us what's going on. He said, it's going on the market, it's going to be sold. And we asked him how much, and it was way beyond our means, but we said, darn it, what have we got to lose? We can be humiliated, but...
Everything.
So we ran down to his office on Monday morning, signed a contract. And again, Chester Provides. Chester Bank was so trusting, thinking we could manage this. And then we had to replace that stairway, and Tom Norton, who was a eminent architect and an expert in Greek Revival architecture, and a friend of ours down the street from our house. He designed this fabulous stairway addition. And he was so proud of it, he got it submitted to Architecture Magazine. That's the upper right-hand corner. And years later, when we were researching to do what you'll see in the second edition, I discovered that it had made a publication, a U.S. government publication, that gave you good and bad examples of how to add on to a historic building. And our building was included as the proper way to add on.
The photograph of us in the lower, in the bottom there, we did a lot of the unskilled labor part.
That's another way we made it work. We did the heavy lifting.
And it took us 6 months to do that. And obviously we had to work, and we had to work a little harder, as a matter of fact. And in fact, GM built a chute out of sonotubes down into a dumpster from the second floor. We literally took out tons of plaster lath and plaster and all kinds of detritus.
And Justin and Jesse, again, who are here tonight. Justin was 14, 15. Jesse was 12, and they pitched in and helped us. They were actually having a ball because we had big sledgehammers to knock them in. The upstairs was a little 5-room apartment, and we made it 1 room. And we said, you know what, no special trips this winter to Disneyland or anything. And I said, this is much more fun than Disneyland. Distraction.
Just a little aside, George Anderson, who's an old world craftsman, built the stairway and helped reconstruct the inside. When he was working up in the attic, he found that bottle hidden in a nook in the attic, and it's a Bass ale bottle, and with a lead top wrapping. And what we suspect is that someone storing dry goods and whatever in the attic storage room saw this cache from England and took a nip and hid the bottle. There was 2 of them actually. So we'll bequeath that to the Historical Society. I think it's an interesting thing. And the other thing we found was a pair of mustache scissors. Anyway, and then.
Probably about 8 years later, when we bought the building, it was Peter, 1 assistant, and I was helping as much as I could because I was still based in the house, kids and so forth. But we really needed more space, and we looked around for alternate spaces, and we were so in love with this building. We said, we've got to add on to it somehow. We'll make it work.
I think we had about 5 employees at that time, and our business was booming. So we embarked on this incredible project. But what a lot of people don't know, or maybe many of you do, but when we did all the planning for this, there was a zoning regulation that we had to have more parking for our employees. And so we constructed the parking area to the right of that building. Before that, the slide, the photograph to the left, that hillside came right down to the sidewalk. And what has happened, and we dealt with it for over 30 years, is that a lot of people assumed that was public parking. And part of it was our fault because we allowed town to use it for any special events, for parades, Memorial Day, you name it, tractor parades. It was filled with, and we allowed that to happen. But then there were times when our own employees couldn't park there, and it became critical. But we never wanted to be hard-nosed about it. We never wanted to threaten to tow cars or anything like that.
That wall actually was the first thing that we did before we could even start construction of the building. And before that, again, Justin and Jesse and Michael Joplin and the crew stripped the entire facade of the building. Got all that old paint off, and while they were doing that, some of the old timers came along and pointed out carving they had done in the columns, and you can see that photograph on the right.
Just a comment about the wall. Stanley Bates did that wall, 75-foot long wall, and there's more rebar, or as much rebar under the parking lot than there is in the wall. So during an earthquake, that wall will still be standing. So that last building story.
That same winter, after we finished the building, we were working on our calendars, and interesting, a lot of people have commented on the calendars that we did in our office. We really don't talk about them because we didn't do them specifically for Chester, but it's wonderful that people did love them and still love them. But anyway, we used to use the building as a billboard, and so that winter we had been working on the Love Calendar, which was Love 2004, and we put up this banner wanting to attract people to come in and buy the calendar. Well, the minister of the United Church saw it, and he put up a sign at the United Church saying, "Love for free." That part of the notice of Channel 8 News, they came down, they interviewed the minister of the church, they interviewed us, did a whole segment on Channel 8. We had a lot of fun.
this Historical Society asked us to do an identity before the name was even solidified. Originally it was going to be Mill, and this is the way any identity starts, or actually any project at all, without exception, starts with a sketch, and fill up a notebook with sketches. And this process is still what we use today. We never go to the computer first, never. And because I think it stifles making connections that are not on a screen in front of you. We put down any ideas, even if we know it's a bad idea, because sometimes a bad idea might lead to a variation that changes it. And so I'm very free in doing that without screening at first, and then little by little you start realizing what absolutely does not work, and then what might have a possibility, and you go on. Ultimately, I chose the cupola as the most remarkable architectural element of the building, and refined it and did this very simple graphic and combined it with a period type, employing the ST ligature, which is will be used on a lot of the signage in Chester, the wayfinding and so forth, because it adds a mnemonic device to the reading of the word Chester. And it's a natural device. It's a natural thing that existed in period typefaces.
I was curious too. I looked up the timing, and fundraising began in 2001, and the museum didn't actually open in 2010. It was quite a project to undertake, and now everyone loves going there and seeing what's on exhibit.
And of course, we adapted it to the mark for the 50th anniversary with the 50.
And I love this photograph that Carrie Hull took when Skip and Edmund were putting up that banner. And it just shows that, Carrie this afternoon was directing parking, and I just think how everyone just pitches in and do what needs to be done to make something work.
In case anyone wants a pin, they just happen to be here. You got a few pins, if you could, pins.
Just more random posters and flyers and so forth, using different techniques and different illustration styles, some are old engravings.
Again, I get a kick out of seeing women were so in the fore as far as having lots of fun. The extravaganza, girls' night out, and actually Peter remembers it was Leslie Strauss who came up with that saying, women have been through the mill. Get points for that.
Yeah, we do the symbol.
Yeah, we did the sample.
The pegs was a creative challenge that the Historical Society has been doing for many years. Saucy Baker did a lot of the work on organizing that. And the pegs actually have another connection to us. Our son Jesse was helping the owner of the Brooks factory get rid of some materials. Ended up with a box of those pegs that came from the Brooks factory.
And they sat in our barn for years, and then when we were still, Saucy was saying, what else can we find in the old factories to use for them?
Because the theme, as many of you know, is to find some object from history in Chester and give it to any participant, and they are to create art with this object. The Celebrate was the 200th anniversary of this building. Our town, a classic Thornton Wilder play, uses an illustration by Jan based on an old Chester photograph. The other was just another celebration, and this demonstrates the difference between our styles. Jan's style takes a lot longer than mine. series, which has become an extraordinary cultural asset to Chester. High-quality musicians with a lot of variety, and we were asked a few years after it started to do an identity for it, and sometimes identities start with letter forms, in this case using RC for Robbie Collmore, and manipulating it a little bit to create this, essentially a monogram, and there is something in my eye that is musical about it, the way it works together and so forth.
This is another example for me of Chester Provides. Whoa, is that too loud? No. Peter and I had met in art school. I was a painter. I could draw beautifully, but I'd never developed my skills as an illustrator per se. And was really frustrated because Peter had some wonderful projects that needed illustration and I could not help. Well, darn it, Carrie Hall lived right next door to us, and one day, talking over the fence, she said, I need someone to do illustrations for Handy Andy magazine that she was editing with her father. And I jumped at the opportunity. I had, for years, I did, laying tile and fixing plumbing and everything else. But it was a great practice for me to be able to do that kind of work. And then I was able to start doing illustration on some of the projects that Peter was designing. And you can see, in a way, how the illustration evolved over time as we show you some of the other. Yeah.
A couple of posters. The one on the right, Mark Twain's sketches, is on here on stage. You can see it's an old mechanical, the way we used to do work before the digital revolution. And there was a lot of handwork, a lot of retouching, a lot of use of photostat cameras and special screens. That's how the Bach piece was done. It's an old engraving that was screened with a photostat machine. It's a screen. There are multiple styles of screens recreating what a halftone does, but with variety. It's called line conversions. And that's the way the Bach thing worked. And then I used a musical register that worked with the horizontal bands.
And you can see on the Mark Twain how we used to have to do mechanicals and protect them and do layers and bring them, hand carry them to the printer or whatever. Very different from today.
More Robbie Collmore using Jan's drawings. You can see the advancement of Jan's skill in these two. We used to have occasionally people over after the concerts, and Robert J. Lertzma, anyone remembers him, he had a radio program out of Boston, and starting early in the morning with bird singing. And
he stayed till close to midnight. And we all kind of said, oh my gosh, because I think his program started at 5 in the morning and started with little birds tweeting. And we said, okay, is he gonna be back in Boston on? And so some of us did listen, and sure enough, we heard those birds tweeting in the morning. And he had told us he only needed a couple hours sleep a night, and I guess that was true. But I have to mention too, we loved interacting with the performers because of our role doing the posters, but Martin and Lois were the best example of Chester hospitality, because for years and years and years, and they still do, welcome a lot of the performers into their home, have them have dinner with them, and welcome them to the town.
Well, this series started with Joan Matz, the director, when Martin took over in the 90s, maybe 2000, whatever. It catapulted the series to a whole new level. And you might even say that you have to be worried about it being sold out, which Mark warned me today for the last concert. But it's worthwhile if you haven't been to one. They're extraordinary. Oh, just some more interesting thing here. I use many different techniques. I use cut paper, engravings, drawings, whatever, or photographic conversions. The gamelan and the lyricord use something called split fountain. The standard printing technique for economical printing was two-color presses. Today, two-color presses are probably more expensive than most digital presses that run four-color. So the advantage of two colors today is not like it was then. But the split fountain takes one of the rollers. You have two rollers, and it's usually two different ink colors. But a split fountain takes one constant color, most likely black, like in these cases. And the other roller, instead of using one ink on it, you use multiple inks. So you have multiple colors going through the press. Now, the thing is, that means as the ink spreads, as the roller turns, each impression is slightly different. But in the short run, it doesn't make a difference, particularly if you're using a color as a decorative element. You don't have to match anything. So it's a way of getting a four-color look in a very economical way. Sometimes typography is enough, like in the Tokyo String Quartet played here. And it was very interesting that they were so pleased with the acoustics in this building because they came from Avery Fisher Hall the day before, and they had to project. And here it was like playing in a large living room. Really, and they loved it. Whaling City Brass Band using old cuts of horn instruments, the Bach Browns, and more. So again, engraving of Bach. It probably was the same one I used on the other poster, treated differently, and combining it with patterns. And the Browns is a line drawing that Jan did, and you can see the development of her skills in that. It's a beautiful drawing, and that was first used for the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra, and then I think I used it again for the NAH series. So again, we exploit our own art. I was asked to do a logo for the Meeting House Players, which is that's the paste up for it, and it's kind of a variation of the tragic comedy Masks, but we abhor cliches, so I would never do that. However, that was the idea that started this one. If you take the eyes away, it almost appears like a dagger with the scabbard and so forth. The nose being the handle, and the beard being the blade. But if you add the eyes, then all of a sudden it looks like a court jester. So it has that both qualities. But the fact is that you don't know that it still is a valid mark, because because sometimes it just becomes a great identity for a theater, whether you make that connection or not. The other interesting thing I found out just about a year ago, the Meeting House Players use a very frequently used typeface called Windsor Elongated. It was popular sometime in the 50s, a little bit in the 60s. But it's a typeface that Woody Allen uses for all his titles on his movies. For some reason, all his movies uses Windsor Elongated.
I also noticed other little details that I hadn't previously. The way Peter merged in the word players, the L and the A. You don't notice it because it looks so right, and it was the way he made the space work between those letters.
Well, it's something typographers call kerning. It's classic letter spacing, where letters are not done in a mechanical way, they're done in an optical way. The Importance of Being Earnest was a play that uses a combination of Jan's drawing and some photo color manipulation. That was an interesting play, and that Jan did the costumes, and we both worked on the sets for a very idiosyncratic director by the name of Jim Goss from Chester.
And we see that Tom Morton was one of the actors, as was Leslie Strauss.
Just a couple of other plays. George Washington Slept Here, obvious. Again, doing the collage out of pieces of period art. I think that came from a fabric catalog and furniture catalog and so forth, and you construct it with the engraving. Its hat has a monogram, it's GW. And Mr. Roberts is kind of obvious, but it's a prop that I
Never
did.
noticed that either.
It's a prop that I did using illustration board with half-round wooden pieces that I got at some store, and constructed it, glued it, and then sprayed it gray, and then did a photostat of it to suggest a nautical bulkhead, and then the stencil type, again, reinforcing the military or naval typography.
And again, I don't think that could ever be done straight on the computer, and it just makes you realize how those hand skills are still needed for designers.
Two other plays, surreal, the juxtaposition of those two characters, it makes a kind of a startling image, and it's about a gentleman farmer. Two one-act plays, just using the large 19th century numeral 2, which is very theatrical in its own form.
And the button on Spoffer's coat. I just noticed that yesterday when we were going through the slides.
Sometimes just straight typography. These were woodblock letters that were inked, printed, and then used for the title. Sometimes sometimes the form of the letters, the number of letters, and so forth, lend itself to a composition. This reminds me of I think the exploitation of this idea I used for a Theater Works play, and the title of the play was As Is. So there were just two-letter words, and I just used them very, very, very large. You could see it from across the street, and that was the novel aspect of the poster and the power of it. Now, I didn't do the stamps for Chester, but I was commissioned. But there is a connection to Chester because Bill Galvin, the postmaster in Chester at that time, gave us permission and suggested it that we use our building as the post office. And ironically, our building was a post office between 1935 and 65. And so we designed our own cancellations, and I used the squirrel on one, the building on another, a different version of the squirrel for the love stamp that I did. And then we used the inside of the seal for the Harmony in Chester, which was the cardinal stamp, which was released after the other 4 holiday stamps. And with Jan's line drawing of the cardinal, a counterpoint to the simple flat-shaped cardinal to the beautiful realistic one.
And the elementary school got involved and brought a bunch of the elementary school kids down to meet Peter and have him sign the cachets, and happened to find that wonderful photograph in Monster Archives, and it was taken by one of the reporters, and it's fun to see the enthusiasm and interest on the faces of the kids.
Jeannie Rapp had several plays, play readings, I should say. She just her theater migrated to Deep River, Iverton, but several were done here in Chester. And North Avenue was an original play that Larry Bloom wrote, the Women classic play. You Can't Take It With You was a Mossart George Kaufman comedy, and a different kind of illustration, which I rarely do, but it seemed appropriate for this. And Michael can comment on the power of hand-done typography for musicals. It just seems right.
I just got a little insight into Larry Bloom's humor, too, in looking at that whole poster. You should get married. You've been happy long enough.
I had the pleasure of being found out my limitations, because you can't take it with you. I was in that, I think I had 12 lines, and I flubbed them. And I had the book right in front of me. Anne's got those limitations. National Theater definitely did a lot of work for them when they were here. These were actually commissions. We actually got a stipend for these. And curious thing about the left one was a general one. It was used for years. And in order to create this, I went through about 40, 50 photographs. And then we did line conversions again. And the curious thing about this is the three faces and the hands came from different photographs, but they were put together because they made sense in spite of the fact that they were not real, because who knows? So but they look real here. And line conversion, particularly when you have this black background, you could push things around. It's like human engineering in a way. And then the dramatic color was put in afterward to suggest theatrical lighting. Odyssey was another NTD play, and that uses Jan's watercolor helmet, Greek helmet, and there's a little issue with David Hayes. I think every director, right, Michael, has their own ideas about what direction should take. And David insisted on the horizon. I said, it doesn't need the horizon, it can just be the helmet. And sometimes it doesn't matter. Either one could have worked. Either one could have worked.
And I liked it too. I like the horizon. Space and creative.
And then just a few other. John Joslow was consulting with the NTD for Curiouser and Curiouser, suggested wrapping a bus with the graphics for Curiouser and Curiouser. And of course, the art was based on the Tenniel drawings, the original Alice in Wonderland. And so we were able to recolorize them and so forth. And it was a stunning thing to see this bus going down the street. Mad Hatter on it. King of Hearts was another comedy. If you ever saw the British movie Insane Asylum, this gets involved in a small town, and that was done with all parts from all kinds of period engravings, and then colorized, and it plays off the King of Hearts, of course. Dylan Thomas was a gouache painting that I did of a photograph of Dylan Thomas, again breaking it down into simple forms. Child's Christmas in Wales uses a beautiful line drawing that Jan did, a more romantic, sentimental look to the piece.
The pewter ornaments were started in 1992. Peter was asked to do the first one. And of course, we used the seal on the back, and the seal did continue to be the back of those ornaments over the years. I had the honor of doing one in 2001, and Edmund Delaney had died in December of the year 2000, and he was on my mind when what kind of an image can I use on this ornament, and I thought about how much he loved the Haddicombe Brooks and the river and the land, and so I came up with the phrase, Chester where the water meets the land. And whenever I look at this ornament, I just think about Edmund and how much we all care about him.
2013 was, I think, many other artists started doing this, but I think no one volunteered for 2013, so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I used the tractor parade symbol that I did, that had the two squirrels die cut out of the tractor seat.
It's convenient. You'd already done that for the carnival that year, so why not use it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes we had to work really fast because we're
Yeah.
busy, and you pull something out of the bag.
The same was true with 2015, because we had done a sticker, because all the merchants were concerned about, what are we gonna do with the bridge? We have to encourage people that you can walk around this town, you don't have to park right in front of the shop or the restaurant where you wanna go. So we had done a sticker, and we used that for 2015.
And just other projects that we did, again, using the squirrel for various town promotions. It's just kind of a repeating of what we just did. Did a lot of-
Always on Sunday was, did you say that was Leslie's or Susie's? I can't remember.
I'm not sure where that came
I think
from.
that was,
But obviously,
It was a play on Never on Sunday, of course.
the Melina McCrory film, which has a funny twist because
We're encouraging people to, come into town and shop. But Tim Hout, the minister of the Deep River Congregational Church, got a big kick out of it. He thought we were promoting going to church. So we gave him a container of those same buttons for him to wear.
and actually it was if you don't know, it was a play on Never on Sunday, which meant prostitutes don't work on Sunday. So there's a funny irony to that whole story. It's another Chester logo, Sunday Chester Market, again,
We were able to, early on, we did, the upper left was quite a comprehensive brochure that we did for the market, promoting it. But now, as time has gone on, the market has become so popular, it needs very little material, although it does have a Facebook, and it's on the Chester website, it has its own website. And we wanted to include the music. Hans and John Williams have been so supportive of the market and coming to play, as have Justin and Jenny, our daughter-in-law. They were still playing this year. And just see all the wonderful, the fun that children have dressing up and having a good time in the market.
Yeah, logos for Chester. Chestel, the upper left, was done for David Jocelyn, who he and Judy were incredibly important to the development of Chester and the restoration of a lot of architecture and businesses. David brought the Chart House restaurant by the mill here and restored that whole building, the Inn at Chester, and I could go on and on. But the interesting thing about that was probably done in the 70s too. And it uses, it was a telephone electronics company. And if you look at the sideways, it's a C, but then it's the shape of a telephone, an old dial phone, which is antique now, of course, so it would be outdated today. Chester Book Company, Martin and Lois's bookstore on Maple Street.
Mad Hatter replaced Robbie's, which now, of course, is River Tavern. And I loved the woman's headpieces, so I was able to do a little silhouette of her profile for them.
Theater Pub was an adjunct restaurant by Charles Vanover and Priscilla Martell, an adjunct to their flagship restaurant, which was Restaurant du Village, which put Chester on the culinary map, as you know. I still remember limos parked in front of that people coming to sample their extraordinary cuisine and ambiance. River Tavern, play on the E's and the River Otto, taking advantage of the symmetry of the word and the fact that it could be played and read several different ways, and the circular symbol because of the pizza and so forth. Up with Paper was Chris Kroll's business doing pop-up cards, same old bank building where Groningen is now for several years. My local beat, obvious illustration I did based on the name. The S is
John Schroeder.
John Schroeder, architect. you think of it as two separate pieces, they almost look like French curves for drafting. But if you look at it holistically, it's an S.
We had lots of fun doing postcards. Now hardly anyone does postcards because they use Facebook and email blast and promote what's going on. But it's fun looking back at like the movable feast because Jonathan Rapp had started that. It was a progressive dinner between Restaurant du Village, River Tavern, and Sig's Water Street Cafe. I don't know how many people even remember Sig's Water Street Cafe. And it's wonderful to see the merchants today are doing collaborative, cooperative events also, as is Brano and the new brewery and Drew at the leather shop. They're combining efforts for events. I had the kind of a wacky idea in August to do cool deals on hot nights, get the women to come out, spend some money because we were having the big sales in August. And I think it's kind of a precursor to Girls' Night Out that Erica has had great success with. Erica, who took over our building and has been a wonderful promoter of the town. The one that was a total bust was Last Minute Man. We thought, how do we get the men to come out and have a good time? And so we thought we'd tease them with the fact that maybe they haven't done any shopping yet, and we'd be here welcoming them and help them and so forth. And we had a lot of fun with the copy, haven't even started yet, no problem, we'll make it easy, fun, and memorable. Well, it did not entice. I think we had maybe 3 guys show up that night. And I don't think any of the other merchants had much luck with it. So that was a trial. We had fun with it, but it wasn't going to work.
I mean, the type on that, you just really type, how are they shopping? It's not finished? Oh, not even started? Oh, forget it. Don't even bother. I did many, many, many ads, especially once we had the building, and even before we had the shop, we had a little gallery upstairs. So it was self-serving, but also was serving the merchants too. And to be able to do group ads, no one entity had to spend much money, and we got a great presence. And this is one of my favorites because this is from Map Tech, which was quite a substantial publication. It was about, I'd say it's about 2 inches thick. It had big spiral plastic binding. It went to all of the yacht owners up and down the East Coast. So we thought this is a great demographic to hit. And we did 5 of these over a course of about 12 years. And I love the fact that I could use those essence painting, which was totally appropriate for yachters to see that here we are in this wonderful town right by the river. Now, as far as more promotion for the town, I remember being excited to see that John Williams at one point had done a little brochure for town. And I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. I was interested in doing something like that. I happen to have the time and the energy, whatever, and the wherewithal, and probably the naivete to think I could even do this. But we did 3 of these, 4 years apart. And by 2013 was the 3rd edition. And of course we had to keep changing it, to keep updating, because the dynamics of the town, there were different restaurants, different shops, people wanted to be included. But by 2013, the internet was starting to take over. So and we still had quite a few brochures. You don't just throw them away or try to reprint. So came up with the idea of doing an insert. Keep the brochures. We all had these stands in the shops, and we sent them to the B&Bs, different places around town and around Connecticut. So we did an insert, and this reflects the time because we did an insert with a QR code so that people could go directly to either the website or the Facebook, or the 3rd one was for the Sunday market, which was also a great draw, very popular. Meanwhile, we had been Let me just make a comment. There were little side blurbs
Oh,
in the
yeah.
brochure, and we asked several people to make a comment, and there was just one that I thought was kind of charming. Not the crossroads of the world, but the crossroads of the spirit. Solitude when you need it, engagement when you want it. Walden Pond meets Broadway. That was Morley Safer that allowed us to use that. I'm sorry, Jim.
Oh, so, that's fine. So actually, in 2014, we volunteered to do a new website and worked with Kirsten Desnoyes. She was our fabulous assistant designer, production gal. She worked on that. Took many of the photographs, wrote a lot of copy, and that's 5 years ago. And we've been trying to keep it current, which is a challenge. And since we left our office and the support we had from our staff, we really haven't been able to keep it up. And we're hoping that someone else will step in. Economic development would help every year with what it costs to even have it hosted. But I really think it needs a professional to get paid to keep it going, or an amazingly big-hearted volunteer. But that's a kind of a call for interest. Keep that going.
Lower right is one of the first sketches we did for the kiosk as part of the Main Street project. Much too large, and it's been adapted to a much smaller one right now by Kent Frost. And the new one, we limited a lot of things like racks for brochures, because there are none. Most people get their information from their phone. And so we had the suggestion of putting a phone charging to this, and then use QR codes so people could easily get all the information they need from their phones.
That drawing was done in 2013, and it's interesting in just these few years, this year is how our ideas of what will work for a kiosk has changed, because we did work with Brian this spring to redo it and rethink it.
Just briefly, we're still doing work for the town, and we were asked to do the Chester Public Library identity. These are, again, preliminary sketches, very first sketches. This will go on before we solidify it.
I just have to say, after we sold the building in October, in the spring, I'm saying, oh, what are we going to do now? We're going to be needed. And I walk into the library and Stephanie Romano says, would you guys work on an identity for the library? Of course, we would love to do that. And then this fall, just a couple of weeks ago, right? We heard from Susan Wright, who's
wants us to do an icon to help during the Main Street project, to let people know that the stores are still open, still active, and so forth. So these are some preliminary sketches for that. Nothing is resolved, nothing is finalized at all. That's the way we work.